we're going to have most of the expert group presentations in the afternoon, but for scheduling reasons, we'll have one now. I see you get the traditional 7 minutes here, or 6 even, according to my notes. We're going to have a presentation of the expert group, Moving Africa Towards a Knowledge-Based Bioeconomy. And Matias Goldman is going to be the person who has the pleasure.
Thank you, Melinda. I'm always yours when you call. I feel embarrassed to be here. Ivar Virgin was going to give this speech, and he couldn't because he's busy doing exactly what we're discussing today. So I was given 6 minutes, and ready to go. But please, I actually never did Pechakucha before, so bear with me.
You're a very efficient and quick person anyway. You're not a professor type, so go ahead and do your normal.
Well, is this going to change every 20 seconds? Wow. All right, so my name is Matias Goldman. I'm from the green and liberal think tank FORES. From FORES, I run a project called ABBA, African Biofuel and Bioenergy Business Assessment. And before that, I ran a project called Forestry for Development. So it's sort of from the biofuel and bioenergy sector that I came for this. And my main concern, and what I think we need in the back of our heads, is climate change. It's always been changing, but we have the highest CO2 amounts on record. And with business as usual, that's where we're going to be in 2050. We need to reduce emissions by at least half to 2050 and probably below zero emissions by the year 2100. We thought we had a wonderful help from oil getting ever more expensive. That's not the case anymore. As you know, we're down to $50 a barrel. So the end of conventional oil might be near. The end of oil is now nowhere near as we thought. That's not going to be the driver that we thought to help us. So we need initiatives. I've been at Lima at the climate negotiations. We see that that's only going to be the floor. The EU needs to do more. Sweden needs to do more than that. One of the things that we're working with is the Swedish target fossil independent transport sector. And we see that that resonates very well with African countries because as opposed to, for instance, Norway, it's not only new cars and it's not only cars, it's all the transport measures. We do that by avoiding transport altogether, by shifting transport modes and by improving. And of course, in an African context, avoiding is probably not the #1 priority. The shift or the avoidance of a shift and then the improvement of transport should be. And then when you look at different perspectives and different forecasts, we see that most people believe that by 2050 we can easily be at around 50% renewable in the transport sector and in the overall energy sector. And then, of course, we add all the other sectors where we also want to switch non-renewable to renewable. And when we see those figures, let's remind ourselves that figures are usually wrong. These are the perceptions from the IEA, how much solar here and how much wind we would have by 2010. These are the lunatics at Greenpeace. That's what they thought in green. And then the black is what actually happened. So you saw that not even Greenpeace got it right. Reality beats perception. When we stick to the transport sector, there's so many different options. There's the ethanol that we always discuss in Sweden. There's the biodiesel. There's the biogas. There's the electricity that obviously also should come from biomass. And that's only the fuel sector, the transport sector. And of course, medicine, pharmaceuticals is going to be a big market. Green chemicals is really catching on. If you go to Hemköp, for instance, the bag you get there, the plastic bag, is actually made from biomass. And you see that in textile, we have had textile from biomass. So actually carbon, we've had forever there, but now we see that plastics and oil are coming out and there's more biomass in the textile sector as well. The 4 main obstacles for Africa to catching on here is 1, the perception of Africa, 2, the very low oil price, 3, the perception that it's basically too crowded, there's no room, and then 4, food versus fuel. First, we need to move from they can't. This whole image that all the NGOs that are trying to get another dollar or krona for us are pushing and peddling. We need to change that perception to come on. This is a long 15 seconds, very long. Yeah, this is what Anders Borg, our previous finance minister, this is actually his slide. His slide and his main argument is that we can't without Africa. We want to have stable pensions in the future, if we want to secure the Swedish way of living, we need to invest much more in Africa. Now, I haven't heard the new finance minister of Sweden pushing it that hard as Anders Borg did. And then the second argument, the cheap oil, of course, is a major hindrance. What made business sense at $140 or even at $100 a barrel won't make business sense necessarily at $50. Now that goes both for new oil investment. There's no appetite for new oil investment on the eastern coast of Africa anymore. You see that Africa Oil, Lundin family are pulling out, but also for the renewables. But it's also a tremendous opportunity to go away from all these fossil fuel subsidies. You will see that very many African countries have fossil fuel subsidies. When we speak of fossil fuels, we think of transport, but also in other sectors. And you see that there's a growing and very impressive worldwide coalition to end those subsidies. And for not enough space, this is a picture actually not from Africa, but there is this perception that there is simply not enough room, and we're soon going to be 9 billion. You heard those arguments many times. And there's the perception that whenever we go for biomass of any kind, we take space that's badly needed for other things. Well, let's focus on those kinds of biomaterials that are very space efficient. First of all, by also doing things in water. This is aquatic biomass. We're going to discuss that more later. And then by using waste or space efficient, this is waste, this is what is Swedish called grot. And this is a very the picture that just disappeared was a very space efficient biomass because it's actually used as a live fence. And then food versus fuel, until now it's basically been for us that are discussing the transport sector, but I'm sure it's going to come to green chemicals, green pharmaceuticals. It's going to be in every area where we want to replace fossil with renewable. So we need to be better at tackling that argument, and luckily we've been doing it for a while, so we know the main arguments that are going to come. And of course it's all about efficient agriculture. There's so many answers out there, there's so many answers in the report that Ivar Virgin is chairing on intercropping, on rotational cropping, and so many other ways where we can actually tackle those issues. Of course, getting there, and that's what you discussed when I came in, requires a change of perception in Swedish politics, in European politics, where we right now have a very tricky situation in the European, both Parliament and Commission, and on a global scale where we see at the global climate negotiations there's much that remains to be done. Now I only thought I had 5 minutes, so I'm going to end up with this, and I'm not sure that I'm supposed to take questions.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was excellent. We do have a few minutes for questions about this presentation or about this expert group. So if there's anybody who would like to ask something? Okay, all right, we'll do ladies first.
Katarina Eriksson, Tetra Laval. So what have you actually done in the expert group?
Well, mainly that's for Melinda to answer, but one thing that's happening is the report that Ivar Virgin is producing about the future opportunities for a bio-based economy in Africa. That's a report that I know that a lot of you are involved in, and I'm sure that those of you that are not involved and would like to be involved, if you just contact Melinda or Ivar or even me, would love to get you on board. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right. I have nothing to add. It's actually a book.
Golia Kimanzu from the Salvation Army. Matias, thanks for a very quick and presentation. I was just wanting to find out what's the long-term implication of the low fuel prices in biofuel investments in Africa. What do you see? And what's the likelihood of the low prices remaining for the long term? It's actually literally a $1 million question. But what we see right now is that most people believe that the low oil price is going to stay. Because if they wouldn't believe in that, they would bunker up oil. They would buy oil cheap, put it on ships, and then sell it next month. And that's not happening, which means that most people believe it's going to hover around $40 to $60 probably for a few years. And that means that a lot of new oil is not going to kick in. We're not going to get much more tar sand oil, which is good news for the environment. And we see that the governments of Kenya and Sudan and others where there's lots of offshore oil opportunities are finding it very difficult to attract investors right now because they also depend on an oil price that's around $80 to $90 for it to be worthwhile. So that's basically good news for the biofuels, but on the short term, we see that especially in South America, those that do biofuels now, mainly ethanol from sugarcane, they switch to sugar. because they can switch from one day to another. So the world sugar price is at its lowest for many years. So that also means that government policy becomes ever more important. First of all, get rid of fossil fuel subsidies. If ever there's an opportunity, it's now. Second, if you're at all thinking about carbon taxes, this is the time to do it. And as in Sweden, if we're thinking about raising them, 7 parties wanted to raise them. If they either got to come out and say we're not going to raise them ever, or this is the time. Everybody thought petrol would be 16 kronas a liter. It's now 12. Nobody's going to get badly damaged if it increases to 13. And thirdly, low blending. There's low blending mandate in roughly half of all African states. That creates a stable market, which means that you have to have 5, 7, 10, 25 in Brazil % biofuels in your fuel. That means that the market will always be there. And in case we don't have those kind of mandates, the market has a very hard time now.
Thank you very much. I think, okay, sorry, yeah?
Thank you. This is very interesting. Yeah.
Who are you?
Yeah. Okay. I think this is very interesting.
Who are you?
You're supposed to give your name.
Sorry. Sorry. I am Pernilla Malmer from the Stockholm Resilience Center and SwedBio. What I think is most interesting actually with the low oil price is that we save a lot of environment by not going into the more fracking, oil sand, Arctic, etc. I just wonder, what do you see for implication, for example, solar energy to be developed? I mean, we are talking a lot about the biofuel, but if you go further, you also need to develop other sources actually for really saving things onward. Thank you.
Thank you, Pernilla. Last year was the biggest year ever for renewable energy investment, and this largest share of that actually went to solar. That's hard to believe when you're in Sweden, but solar was the #1 market winner. And when you see the drivers for solar, it's not on a strict market where you compete directly with oil price or with other electricity prices. Most of the markets where solar does well, there's government incentives. And I don't see anywhere where those government incentives are going to be lessened or reduced or taken away. So it looks like for short to mid-term, solar is going to go well. In the long term, when solar becomes an alternative, just like large-scale hydro, for instance, people are going to say it's going to have to compete on its own merits, and that's when oil price becomes a direct competitor. But for the forthcoming decade, it's still largely government incentives driven. There's more.
More? Okay. All right. We take one more. This is the annual meeting. We're supposed to be participatory. Go ahead.
Hi, I was just wondering when you're talking about Oh, I'm sorry. Of course. I'm Angelina Bellamy. I'm a postdoc at Stockholm Resilience Center. And I was just wondering, when talking about investments in oil and that the incentives are lower at the moment, is there a growing trend of divestments, and how do you think that might act in the future in impacting oil production as well?
The divestment thing is very interesting. It started happening rapidly at the New York session that Ban Ki-moon was holding. Rockefeller Foundation was the one actually moving out first, and people thought that's Rockefeller. It's not really, it's their foundation. But those people that did move out earned a shitload of money because they moved out in August just before the oil price went down. Those that didn't divest, well, they're stuck now with shares that are worth roughly half that they would have been if they would have sold them in August. So that's an important lesson for the market. But we see that most divestment has actually been coal. For instance, when you look at Swedish major banks like Nordea, they divested and they brag about it, and they're rightfully doing so, but they divested in coal and not yet in oil. And I think those that didn't divest in oil in August, they're not going to do it now because people believe that in a few years' time, oil price is probably going to kick back up, and so now is probably not the right time to sell. Let me just say I'm nowhere near as busy as Melinda says. I'm going to stick around until lunch. So I'd love to take questions during lunch.
Okay, very good. Thank you. All right, an applause for Matias.